Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Solar Valley Complement video series for our upcoming Solar Valley Conference on September 14th, 8 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. This year's conference will examine the current public policy conditions under which solar operates, with an emphasis on creating pathways for increased deployment throughout Riverside and San Bernardino counties. The conference will focus on what decision makers are thinking and planning, and how we can coordinate as an industry to get more done. The conference will be a place where we as stakeholders can work together on a coordinated push to transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and much, much more. And now I would like to welcome SC Rise Solar Valley Consortium Deputy Director, Professor Fred Schwartz.
Very much, Jill. Really looking forward to this presentation. I now have the pleasure of introducing Stephen Strong. Stephen is president of Solar Design Associates, an interdisciplinary firm of professionals dedicated to the design, engineering, and implementation of renewable energy for residential, commercial, industrial, and utility clients. He founded the firm in 1974 after serving as an energy systems engineering consultant on the Alaska Pipeline. So it is with great pleasure that we introduce Stephen Strong. Take it away, Stephen.
Sunlight is life. We need to make the rapid transition to renewable energy, and storage is enabling both wind and solar to compete directly and beat conventional technologies at utility scale electrical generation. We'll look at solar plus storage and solar plus storage as a microgrid. This is a community on an island off the coast of Massachusetts that never had an undersea cable and has been running on generators since they got there. It's very expensive. Bringing the fuel over is a challenge. The very well sheltered harbor is very favorite visiting place for the cruising crowd, and they soak up a lot of shore power when they bring their boats in. And that actually supports the community 30% of their entire budget each year. The logistics of building a microgrid on an island were very challenging. The barge is bringing over the pole driving equipment to set the array support system, and they've got to get it off there and get it up to the site. The battery containers are being loaded on a smaller ferry. Amazing how they got this done. 2 of those back in there. This is a view of the site. The challenge was to find an area that could take 350 kilowatts of solar and on a south-facing slope. Fortunately, a landowner was willing to make that available, but it was a mile away from the existing powerhouse. You can see the line in red where we had to run the electrical interface. That's a drone shot of the solar array on the south-facing slope with the power electronics in the distance. Closer view of the power electronics and the stepping transformer. There's the powerhouse. They have 4 generators on station, what I call the mama bear, papa bear, and baby bear, because they want to load follow, so they have efficient use of the fuel. And we had to interface with that control software, which was a challenge. The battery enclosures are shipped empty. The batteries come separately shipped in protective packaging, and they are slid in almost like drawers into this mounting structure. There are 2 of these containers. Each has 1/2 a megawatt hour for a total of 1 megawatt hour of storage. The system is configured as shown in the schematic. It powers about 80% of the annual requirements for the island's electricity. They've saved considerable money. They have reduced noise on the island, and of course, have clean power. We'll go through in less detail a number of installations to show the variety of applications. This is a desert desalination station we did in the desert in Saudi Arabia back in the early 80s. It's a solar plus storage microgrid because there's no utility. In this case, the storage is the product water. When the sun shines, the system makes clean water and it's stored. Now down into Belize. This is a barrier island off the coast of Belize where an ecotourism resort wanted to power themselves with solar because the utility on the south end of the island is too feeble to support on a good day. Specific element of this installation is the mounting system, where the modules are balanced on a central torque tube so that they can be tilted down to flat in the event of an approaching hurricane and save the destruction. You've got a billboard of glass versus 2 inches of aluminum as an edge. These can be adjusted by hand because they're perfectly balanced and can be removed quite quickly, within an hour or so. There's the single line electrical drawing, very similar to the Cuddy Hunk installation. Multiple generators, control interface. This is a private island in the Caribbean. The owner wanted to be as fully renewable powered as possible. There's a 0.5 megawatt of solar and 750 kilowatt hours, 3/4 of a megawatt hour of lead acid battery storage. There's an aerial view. There are multiple wind turbines interfaced with the solar array, and there are multiple generators for backup when the renewable supply is not sufficient. However, they're pushing over 90% of their power generated by renewables. That saves a lot of diesel, and it also gives them a very quiet island, which of course they appreciate very much. Very similar electrical configuration here. You see the multiple generators and the wind turbine and multiple loads. This has AC distribution at 12.6 kilovolts. That's essentially community scale distribution on the island. It was quite a project for us because this was the early days, but the client is very, very happy. Commercial and industrial applications are growing now very quickly because the cost of this equipment and the reliability is being improved almost monthly. This is an industrial facility that cannot tolerate a single glitch in their utility supply because they have a plating line, and if the electricity goes down, everything freezes up. So the microgrid was extra insurance to be certain that their emergency generator would come on, and if it didn't, the microgrid with storage could power the facility until, if the outage was intended to be extended, they could shut the line down properly. We helped Hampshire College, which is in Western Massachusetts, power their entire campus with solar plus storage. There's 5 megawatts of solar in 2 separate array fields, each with a 0.5 megawatt of storage. A total of 5 megawatts of solar and a megawatt hour of storage. There's a cluster of 5 Tesla power blocks, each with 100 kilowatt hours for half a megawatt. You see the power electronics and the transformers as well. And lastly, utility scale solar plus storage. This is, I think, 2.5 megawatts of solar in central Massachusetts. And the storage module is in the left middle of the screen, a white speck down there. And a closer view, of course, is above in the upper right of the screen, showing the 10 Tesla. That's a generation 1 power block. Each one is 100 kilowatt hours for a megawatt hour. And the best news yet, which is solar and wind plus storage are now the lowest cost options for utility scale power. And that's because the cost and the reliability of storage has accelerated dramatically beyond anyone's expectations. And literally, if you follow the curves, the highest one is nuclear, the pink, and then the next one down is coal, and then the next one down on the right is natural gas, and wind and solar in favorable resource environments are now beating, hands down, natural gas. In fact, in Arizona, which is not a blue state, the Tucson Electric Power Company petitioned the Public Utility Commission to install a new natural gas-fired peaker plant because they projected a significant load growth into the future. The PUC reviewed the numbers and said, we don't believe you're going to see that load growth. And what about efficiency, folks? And if you think you're going to see that load growth, we're not going to let you build that peaker plant because we ran our own numbers, and solar plus storage does a whole lot better in Arizona. And so they built a solar plus storage system. Utilities are now embracing solar and storage and wind and storage, and perhaps even both solar and wind with storage, and volunteering to shut down their coal plants in an orderly schedule. When I started in solar, I had hoped that I would be able to see this tipping point where the economics of renewables are so compelling that you don't have to be a tree hugger to love it. Thank you.
Stephen, what a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. I now have the pleasure of introducing Professor Alfredo Martinez Morales, who is the Managing Director of SCRISE, that's the Southern California Initiative for Solar Energy. Alfredo is also co-chair, along with Professor Ronald O. Loveridge, of our Solar Valley Consortium.
Hi, Steve. Fred, thank you for the introduction. And Steve, thank you for the very interesting presentation. You have been working on microgrids for a very long time. And I think, you know, you have been able to see in person the success of designing and deploying these type of systems. In your experience, could you tell us, you know, 3 of the major takeaways or lessons learned that you have been able to see throughout your professional career, and you know that you think others who are embarking in the deployment of microgrids should consider heavily as they move forward?
Well, Alfredo, the biggest impediment I see now for our future is policy. And you can understand that perhaps with the current national situation. The technology is proven, it's reliable, it's essentially off the shelf, and it is very cost competitive. You mentioned the engineering and design. The mainstream electrical and mechanical and civil engineering resources are not fully focused on renewables yet, but the field is growing rapidly, and many practitioners are understanding how to apply these new technologies in the most cost-effective and reliable way. And as you saw earlier, we have crossed the tipping point where the economics are compelling now. It's not just tree huggers and environmentalists that are supporting renewables. Warren Buffett himself has pledged to field gigawatts of solar plus storage and wind plus storage, because he sees the economics both of the initial investment and the operating costs, and of course the benefits to the environment.
Steve, so you mentioned that policy is the biggest impediment today. What do you think it would take, to reverse the course, to basically, take the approach of developing policy that is based on the realities of, moving away from carbon, fuels or, fossil fuels? What do you think, policymakers need to do in order to change things?
Well, first and foremost, we need to get out and vote in November. And we need to rejoin the Paris Accords. We need to focus our resources, both communally, at the state level, at the federal level, and also, more difficult, the global level, to rapidly move to a clean energy economy. We don't have a surplus of time to do this in a casual manner any longer. And policy, of course, is the instigator, because there are a lot of folks who still aren't conversant with the benefits, opportunities, and savings, economic savings. There's a lot of inertia in the system, Alfredo, is I think the best way to put it.
And concerning the design and the integration of the systems, what are the challenges that you have faced in terms of interconnecting, the microgrids or deploying the microgrids, particularly when you think about compliance, with the electrical code or, fire safety? Has that been, a major challenge for your projects?
You're correct. It has been in the earlier days when new equipment and systems components were introduced. It takes a long time and a fair amount of effort to obtain UL approval, for example. And most of the electrical codes, including the US National Electrical Code, require Underwriters Laboratory certification for these components. So we have brought many pieces of equipment through UL as consultants, and it's 6 months to a year often, and 6 figures, if not more. So that's one issue. Code authorities and the inspectors that administer those requirements are not fully conversant with this new equipment, and so they naturally have concerns. They need to be educated. Many of them are very interested in learning, some are not. So that's an area that also requires additional time. The construction teams, electricians are good at doing conventional electrical work. Most of them are not at all familiar with direct current or storage systems, and more importantly, the controls to operate them effectively. And so the design engineers have to understand these requirements, and with patience, often help to walk the contractors through the process so that the equipment is installed properly and is commissioned so that it is optimally functioning. So all of those are challenges bringing new technology into widespread use. They're understandable and they're solvable, but it takes time and effort.
Yeah. When you have someone who's not familiar with the concept of a microgrid, how do you describe a microgrid to a person who may have heard of it, but is not quite familiar with what it is?
Well, it's pretty straightforward, breaking it down into its components. You have a renewable energy source in most cases, although sometimes microgrids are driven by conventional fossil-driven equipment. It just allows you, in its pure sense, to operate independent from the utility grid. Some of the applications, especially the commercial industrial one I showed you, can be interfaced with the utility or not. A current project that we're working on off the coast of Maine has a legacy undersea cable powering the island. Their motivation to go to solar plus storage as a microgrid is that the undersea cable is 37 years old and it could fail at any time. And of course, the cost of the replacement cable is greater than the cost of the solar plus storage microgrid on the island. So they're actually going to cut the cord. The Cuttyhunk Island project never had an undersea cable, and they were dependent on diesel for 100% of their power. That was very expensive, and they have the issues of offloading the diesel and the potential for spills and such. And so the people out at the fringes understand the significance of the benefits. Mainstream is coming along. One of the biggest benefits is resiliency. So you see, for example, police and fire facilities or clinics or even schools where they can become a public shelter are very popular early applications for microgrids because they can be used on a daily basis to arbitrage the peaks and valleys of electrical demand and actually earn money by clipping peak demand requirements when utility costs are so high. And that helps to pay for the resiliency benefits that are so valuable, but not that often used, fortunately.
Thank you, Steve.